seafood is wasted on a palate that hasn't developed yet. My sister Tiffany said this without looking up from her phone, her thumbs tapping away at a caption for her latest post. She slid a plastic packet of saltines across the pristine white tablecloth toward my 6-year-old son, Noah. Next to the crackers, she placed a glass of lukewarm tap water. Meanwhile, in the center of the table, the $280 Jumbo King Crab tower glistened under the warm lights of the marina deck, smelling of butter and the ocean. My father, Robert, nodded in agreement as he cracked a massive claw, juice running onto his chin. "He looks well-fed enough already," he muttered, dipping the meat into drawn butter. I looked at the dry crackers. Then I looked at the crab. And then I looked at my son, who was trying to smile because he had been taught to be grateful for whatever he was given. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. That moment wasn't loud. It didn't come with a crash of thunder or a dramatic gasp from the other diners. It was quiet. It smelled like brine and expensive perfume and absolute indifference. I froze. I watched Noah pick up the plastic wrapper of the saltines, his small fingers fumbling with the edge, trying to be quiet, trying to be good. And that is when something inside me snapped. Not like a dry twig, but like a steel cable that had been bearing too much weight for too many years. I realized I wasn't just looking at my son. I was looking at a mirror. Noah eating those crackers while they feasted wasn't just a rude gesture. It was an inheritance. I was watching the exact moment the family curse was being passed down to the next generation. The curse of a good child. The curse of the spare. For 32 years, I had swallowed the crackers so Tiffany could eat the crab. I had been the silent architecture, holding up their lives. I was the one who paid our parents' mortgage during the slow seasons when my father refused to budget. I was the one who wired $14,000 to Tiffany just last month for her supposed brand launch because she had convinced our parents it was a vital investment in the family legacy. I had done all of it. I had stayed silent because I thought silence was the price of admission to this family. I thought if I was helpful enough, quiet enough, and generous enough, eventually they would hand me a plate. But looking at my son's small, resigned face, I realized the truth. They weren't feeding him scraps because they were thoughtless. They were feeding him scraps to teach him his place. They were training him, just like they had trained me, to accept that his needs were secondary to their desires. A wave of nausea hit me, followed immediately by a clinical, crystal-clear realization. This is the silent scream of the good child. It's that moment you realize that your compliance isn't buying you love, it's just buying them comfort. By staying silent right now to keep the peace, I wasn't protecting my family. I was betraying my son. I was teaching him to starve. I was teaching him that his hunger mattered less than their excess. The anger that flooded my system wasn't hot or chaotic. It was absolute zero. It was a clarity so sharp it cut through decades of gaslighting and obligation. I looked at my mother, Susan, who was busy taking a photo of the seafood tower, carefully angling it so the crackers didn't show in the frame. She was curating the memory, editing out the cruelty, just like she always did. I took a breath. I wasn't going to be the fixer anymore. I wasn't going to be the daughter who smoothed things over or picked up the check or apologized for taking up space. I was going to be the protector. And the first step in my new role wasn't to make a scene. It was to correct the menu. "Excuse me." I signaled the waiter with a subtle lift of my hand. He hurried over, looking relieved to have something to do other than witness the awkward cruelty unfolding at table 4. He had his pen ready, expecting a request for more napkins or perhaps another round of cocktails for my parents. I spoke clearly, keeping my voice low and even, ensuring the tone wasn't one of hysteria, but of executive decision.
"There has been a change of plans," I said.
"Please cancel the Chilean sea bass for the lady and the lobster thermidor for the gentleman. Also, cancel the bottle of Dom Perignon." The table went silent. The kind of silence that sucks the air out of a room. Tiffany stopped typing on her phone, her mouth slightly open. My father, Robert, looked at me as if I had suddenly spoken in tongues. The waiter hesitated, his pen hovering over his pad. I smiled at him, a tight, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. "And for the young man here, I continued, gesturing to Noah and his packet of saltines. "We will take the Jumbo King Crab Tower. Market price. Whatever he wants. And bring him a Shirley Temple. Extra cherries." My father found his voice first. "Emily, what do you think you are doing? You cannot just cancel our dinner." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the waiter. "Put the appetizers they have already consumed on my father's tab. The crab goes on mine. That will be all. Thank you." The waiter, sensing the volatility radiating from my father, gave a quick nod and vanished toward the kitchen to stop the order. "You are embarrassing us," my mother hissed, looking around to see if anyone at the nearby tables was watching.
But they weren't watching me.
They were watching the waiter return moments later with a silver stand towering with ice, crab legs, prawns, and oysters, placing it directly in front of my 6-year-old son. Noah's eyes went wide. For the next 20 minutes, while my family sat with empty placemats and full glasses of water, my son ate like a king. I cracked the legs for him. I dipped the meat in butter. I watched the color return to his cheeks. My family watched him too, but not with love. They watched him with a mixture of disbelief and greed, furious that the resources they felt entitled to were being wasted on a child. When we finally walked out into the parking lot, the cool night air didn't cool down the rage. It ignited it. We hadn't even reached the cars before my father spun around, blocking my path. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, the invoice for the private room booking. "You owe me $2,500, he said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. "That is the minimum spend for the room plus the cancellation fees for the food you sent back. Transfer it tonight." I looked at the paper, then at him. "I lent Tiffany $14,000 last month," I said. "She called it a loan for her brand launch. She hasn't paid back a dime. Deduct the dinner from that." Tiffany scoffed, crossing her arms. "That was an investment, Emily. You said you wanted to support my career. You can't hold that over my head just because you're throwing a tantrum." And that is when I understood. I looked at their faces, my father's indignation, my sister's entitlement, my mother's martyr-like sigh, and I finally saw the invisible balance sheet they had been keeping since I was born. This is the concept of the narcissist's ledger. In a healthy relationship, generosity is a deposit into a shared emotional bank account. It builds trust and equity. But in a toxic family dynamic, the ledger is rigged. To them, my money, my time, and my energy were not gifts. They were interest payments on a debt I never incurred. In their minds, I owed them for my existence. I owed them for being the boring one, the one who didn't need extra attention, the one who took up space that could have been used for Tiffany. When I gave Tiffany $14,000, she didn't feel gratitude. She felt reimbursed. She felt that money was back pay for the years she had spent being the star of the family, while I sat in the audience. They truly believed that my resources belonged to them by default, and any attempt I made to keep them for myself or my son was an act of theft. "I am not paying you," I said. "Not for the room. Not for the cancellation. And Tiffany, I expect a repayment plan for the $14,000 by Monday." My father stepped closer, using his height to intimidate me, a tactic that had worked for 3 decades. "You are walking on thin ice, Emily. You do not turn your back on family over a dinner." I unlocked my car door and ushered Noah inside. "I didn't turn my back on family," I said through the open window. "I just stopped paying the admission fee." As I drove away, I saw them standing under the streetlights, looking less like a family and more like a pack of wolves that had just realized their prey had grown teeth. I knew this wasn't over. I knew the invoice was just the opening shot. But as I looked at Noah in the rearview mirror, happily asleep with a full belly, I knew I had made the only choice that mattered. The next morning, my phone wasn't just buzzing. It was vibrating so intensely I thought it might shake itself off the nightstand. I picked it up, scrolling past 7 missed calls from my mother and a dozen texts from Tiffany. But it was the Instagram notification that made my blood run cold. Tiffany had gone live. Or rather, she had posted a carefully edited reel of the dinner. The video started with a close-up of her tear-streaked face, the kind of perfectly lit vulnerability that influencers rehearse in the mirror. "My sister ruined my family celebration because she was jealous," the caption read. The video cut to a shaky, out-of-context clip of me signaling the waiter. The audio was crisp. Cancel the Chilean sea bass. Cancel the bottle of Dom Perignon. Then it cut back to Tiffany, sobbing about how I had humiliated our parents on their anniversary, how I had snatched food away from the table because I was bitter about her success. She didn't show the crackers. She didn't show the tap water. She didn't show my son eating while they starved. She had edited the narrative until the only thing left was her victimhood and my cruelty. The comments were already rolling in, hundreds of strangers calling me petty, vindictive, and toxic. But the digital siege was just the first wave. By noon, the texts had turned from angry to nuclear. My mother, Susan, sent a message that was less a text and more a manifesto. We are so disappointed in you. After everything we have done, we are speaking to friends, and everyone agrees you are out of control. You need help. Then came the isolation. I received a text from Sarah, a mutual friend I had known since college. Hey, Tiffany told me what happened. I didn't realize you were going through something, but maybe it's best if you don't come to the brunch on Sunday. We don't want any drama. They were turning my world against me. They were methodically burning every bridge I had, isolating me until I had no choice but to crawl back. It was a classic siege tactic: cut off the supply lines, starve the enemy, force a surrender. But the real blow, the one that actually made my knees buckle, came via certified mail 2 days later. I opened the heavy envelope at my kitchen counter, my hands trembling. It was a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Visitation rights for Noah. My parents weren't just mad. They were suing me. They were threatening to file for grandparents' rights, claiming that my erratic behavior and alienation of Noah were damaging his emotional well-being. The letter cited my public outburst at the restaurant as evidence of my instability. I dropped the letter. The room spun. They didn't care about Noah. They had fed him saltines while they ate king crab. They hadn't asked about his school, his friends, or his life in months. This wasn't about love. This was about leverage. They knew Noah was the only thing in the world I would break for. They were holding a gun to my child's head to force me to open my wallet. Fear washed over me, hot and suffocating. But then, just as quickly, it evaporated. It was replaced by the same cold clarity I had felt in the restaurant. They had made a critical error. They thought they were fighting the old Emily, the one who was afraid of losing them. But that Emily was gone. They were fighting a mother who had just been handed a declaration of war. I picked up the letter. I didn't tear it up. I scanned it. I saved it. I screenshotted Tiffany's video. I exported the text logs. I was done playing defense. If they wanted a legal battle, I would give them one. But I wouldn't just fight for custody. I would fight for everything. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text Tiffany. I didn't post a rebuttal video crying about how unfair it all was. Silence is the loudest noise you can make in a war of attrition. I went completely dark. While they were waiting for me to beg, I was building a fortress. The next morning, I took a personal day from work, not to rest, but to restructure. I walked into the office of David Thorne, a family law attorney known for being as warm as a shark tank. I handed him the custody threat, the harassment logs, and the receipts. He scanned them without blinking. They are phishing, he said, tossing the letter onto his desk. They have no grounds for custody, but they can make your life expensive and loud. We need to make it expensive and quiet for them.
Do it, I said.
But I need something else. I need a forensic audit. I had been the executor of the family trust for 3 years, a role my father had dumped on me because math gave him a headache, and Tiffany couldn't be trusted not to spend the principal on handbags. I had access to everything: the ledgers, the bank statements, the investment portfolios. I had never looked too closely at the history before my tenure. I had trusted them. That trust was now a liability. I hired a forensic accountant named Marcus. He was a man of few words who treated numbers like crime scenes. I gave him read-only access to the family accounts and a specific directive: trace every dollar that had moved in or out of the estate in the last 10 years. I needed to know exactly how much money they had, how much they owed, and most importantly, where my contributions had gone. For 3 days, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I blocked my family on everything. I changed the locks on my house. I installed a security camera. I created a new email address for legal correspondence only. I was methodically scrubbing my life of their fingerprints. Then, on Thursday afternoon, Marcus called me.
"Ms. Vance," he said.
His voice was flat, professional. "I have found a discrepancy." "What kind of discrepancy?" I asked, pulling up my laptop to follow along. "You mentioned that your college fund, the one left by your grandmother, was lost in a bad market investment in 2019. Is that correct?" "Yes," I said. "My father told me the aggressive growth fund tanked. I lost everything. I had to take out loans to finish my degree." "I am looking at the transaction history from that period," Marcus said. "There was no market loss. The fund didn't tank. It was liquidated." The room went very still. Liquidated.
"Yes."
On October 14th, 2019, the entire balance, $68,000, was withdrawn in a single cashier's check. It wasn't lost to the market, Emily. It was cashed out. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. October 2019. The date clawed at the back of my mind. I remembered that month. I remembered the stress, the late-night shifts at the data entry job I took to pay tuition, the way my father had sighed and told me that sometimes money just evaporates. "Who signed for it?" I asked. "Your father." But here is the anomaly. The check wasn't deposited into his personal account. It was made out to a third party. A law firm. Blackwood and Associates. I typed the name into my search bar. Blackwood and Associates. Criminal defense. DUI specialists. The pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a car crash. October 2019 wasn't just the month I lost my college fund. It was the month Tiffany had gone to a wellness retreat for 3 weeks. She had disappeared from social media. My parents had been frantic, secretive. They told me she was exhausted. They told me she needed a break from the public eye. They lied. "Marcus," I said, my voice trembling with a rage, so cold it felt like ice in my veins. "Keep digging. I need to know exactly what that firm was paid for." I hung up the phone. I didn't need to wait for the confirmation.
I knew.
They hadn't lost my future. They had stolen it. They had taken the money meant for my education, money my grandmother had specifically left for me, and they had used it to buy Tiffany's freedom. They had bailed her out of a crime, scrubbed her record, and left me to pay for my own life with student loans and 2 jobs, all while telling me I should be grateful they didn't charge me rent during the summers. This wasn't just unfair family dynamics anymore. This wasn't just a toxic relationship. This was grand larceny. This was fraud. And I finally had the smoking gun. I sent a single email. The subject line was simple: family meeting. I addressed it to my parents and Tiffany, copying Uncle David and Aunt Karen, who had been quietly supportive but oblivious to the depth of the corruption. I attached a time and a location, my attorney's conference room, Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning. They arrived thinking they had won. My father strode in with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards, clutching the custody paperwork like a weapon. My mother looked pained and martyred, ready to play the peacemaker while enabling the war. Tiffany was there, too, looking bored, scrolling on her phone, clearly annoyed that she had to be awake before noon. David Thorne sat at the head of the table, silent and imposing. I sat next to him, a thick manila folder in front of me. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer coffee. "Let's make this quick," my father said, tossing the custody papers onto the table. "We are prepared to move forward with the visitation suit unless you agree to resume your financial obligations to the family." "Sit down," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had a weight to it that stopped him mid-sentence. He hesitated, then sat, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "There will be no visitation suit," I said, opening the folder. "Because if you file it, I will file this." I slid the first document across the polished wood. It was a high-resolution print of the Crocker incident, a still frame from the restaurant's security footage that my attorney had subpoenaed. It showed Tiffany handing Noah the saltines while the rest of the table feasted. This is Exhibit A, I said. Proof of neglect and emotional cruelty during a family gathering. A judge will love this. Tiffany rolled her eyes. It was a joke, Emily. You have no sense of humor. And this, I continued, sliding the second document, is Exhibit B. It was a spreadsheet detailing every loan, every mortgage payment, every investment I had made into this family over the last decade. The total was staggering, nearly $200,000. These are unauthorized loans, David Thorne interjected, his voice smooth as silk. In the absence of a repayment agreement, these could be classified as financial abuse of a family member. My mother gasped. Abuse? We are your parents. And this, I said, sliding the final document across the table, is the end. It was the bank record. The withdrawal of $68,000 from the Lost College Trust Fund, dated October 14, 2019. Directly below it was the invoice from Blackwood and Associates for legal defense, DUI/reckless endangerment. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was vacuum-sealed. My father's face drained of color. Tiffany stopped scrolling. My mother looked from the paper to my father, her hand covering her mouth. You didn't lose my college fund, I said, looking my father in the eye. You stole it. You committed fraud and embezzlement to keep your golden child out of jail, while I worked double shifts at a call center to pay for textbooks. Emily, please, my mother whispered, reaching across the table. We were trying to protect her future. By stealing mine? I asked.
No.
You weren't protecting her future. You were protecting your image. You were protecting the paper house. This is the paper house theory. From the outside, a paper house looks perfect. It has structure, it has paint, it has curb appeal. But it has no foundation. It is held together by tape and lies. My family's reputation, their lifestyle, their brand. It was all paper. And for years, I had been the only structural beam keeping it from collapsing. I was the windbreak. I was the glue. I have prepared 2 packets, I said, placing my hand on the remaining files. Packet 1 goes to the family court judge, along with a petition for a permanent restraining order. Packet 2 goes to the IRS and the district attorney's office for an investigation into trust fund fraud. Tiffany stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You wouldn't. You'd go to jail, too. You're the executor. I became executor after the theft. I corrected her. I have immunity as the whistleblower. You, however, do not. My father looked defeated. He aged 10 years in 10 seconds. What do you want? I want you to sign this. David Thorne slid a document across the table. It is a binding agreement. You will never contact Emily or Noah again. You will drop the custody suit with prejudice. You will repay the stolen trust fund amount plus interest within 90 days. If you fail to do any of these things, we file the criminal charges.
They signed.
They didn't argue. They didn't beg. They signed because they knew the paper house was already on fire, and I was the one holding the match. I walked out of that office and didn't look back. Without my financial support, the collapse was swift. The yacht club membership was revoked. Tiffany's brand evaporated without funding for fake followers and photo shoots. They downsized, disappeared from the social scene, and faded into the background of a city that no longer cared about them. I didn't destroy them. I just let gravity take over. 2 weeks later, I sat by a campfire in the mountains. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and wood smoke. Noah was sitting next to me on a log, his face smeared with chocolate and marshmallow, laughing at a story I was telling him. There were no white tablecloths. There was no expensive wine. There was just us, the fire, and the infinite open sky. Mom? Noah asked, looking up at the stars. Yeah, bud. This is the best dinner ever. I smiled, pulling him close. Yeah, I said. It really is. Freedom isn't free.
It costs you people.
It costs you history. But looking at my son, happy and safe and whole, I knew I had gotten the bargain of a lifetime. If you've ever felt like the structural beam holding up a rotting house, share this story. You deserve to build something of your own.